The night Rafe Harlan turned 47, he was riding back from a dead man's funeral with 20 brothers behind him and nothing ahead but fog. Dex had been 52, lung cancer caught late, treated never. He'd refused the doctors the way he'd refused everything that smelled like surrender, with a quiet shake of his head and a look that said he'd already made his peace. The club had buried him that afternoon in a cemetery outside Millhaven, in a plot he'd paid for himself 3 years before he needed it. Practical man Dex, right up to the end. Rafe hadn't cried at the graveside. He wasn't built for public grief. But riding home through the dark with the fog rolling off the hills and the highway empty in both directions, he felt the weight of it settling into his chest like something that intended to stay. Another brother gone. Another name on the wall back at the clubhouse. Another reminder that the years didn't stop moving just because you wanted them to. 47 years old. 12 years as president of the Iron Wolves MC. He'd started counting losses somewhere around year 4 and had never quite stopped. Highway 9 curved through the low country west of Bridgewater County, Virginia, a road Rafe had ridden so many times he could have done it blind. 2 lanes, no shoulder worth mentioning, hills rising dark on both sides, and the occasional farmhouse set back far enough that its lights were just suggestions in the mist. Good riding country when the weather was clear. Tonight it was anything but. The fog had come in off the river an hour ago and thickened steadily ever since, cutting visibility down to the reach of his headlight and not much more. He held the pace steady. Behind him, the column of iron wolves stretched back into the white engines, a low synchronized rumble that he felt as much as heard 20 men riding in the kind of formation that only came from years of trust. Cannon rode second as always, Sledge third. The rest in order, each man holding his lane, each man watching the one ahead. They came around the long curve past the old quarry road when Rafe's headlights swept the guardrail and stopped. The rail was gone. A section of it, maybe 30 feet bent outward and downward, the posts torn from the earth like they'd been struck by something moving fast. The asphalt at the edge was scarred with tire marks, long black streaks that curved hard to the right before they disappeared over the lip. Rafe had his arm up before he fully understood why. The signal passed back down the column, 20 engines easing to idle, then cutting out one by one until the night was almost silent. He dismounted and walked to the edge. The ravine below was steep, maybe 40 feet of rock and scrub before it leveled into a narrow creek bed. His flashlight found the car about halfway down a silver sedan passenger side, crushed against a boulder driver's side door hanging open. The windshield was gone. Steam rose from somewhere under the hood, thin and white, mixing with the fog. And then the light found her. She was wearing a wedding dress. The fabric had been white once. Now it was dark at the shoulder, dark across the front, dark everywhere that mattered. She was on her side in the mud, in broken glass, one arm stretched toward the road above her, the other pressed flat against her stomach. Her stomach that was round and full, in 8 months of someone's life. She was alive. He could see her moving, barely, but moving. Rafe was down the embankment before anyone else had reached the guardrail. He went fast and careless, grabbing at rocks and roots, tearing the knee of his jeans on something sharp, not slowing. Behind him, he heard Cannon shout his name, and then heard boots on gravel as others started down. He reached her and dropped to his knees. She was young, early 30s maybe, dark hair plastered to her face by mud and something darker. Her eyes were open, green, the color of deep water, and fighting hard to stay that way. She looked at him the way people looked when they'd been alone with something terrible long enough to stop believing help was coming, with a desperate disbelief, like she wasn't sure he was real. "I've got you," Rafe said. He kept his voice level. Calm was what she needed right now, not his own racing pulse. "Don't try to move, I've got you." Her lips moved. He leaned closer. "He's coming back," she whispered. The words came out cracked and slow, like they'd been waiting a long time to be said. He said he'd come back to finish it. Please." "Nobody's coming back," Rafe said. "Not while I'm here." Her hand found his forearm and gripped it. The strength in her fingers surprised him. Thin fingers, trembling, but holding on with everything she had left. "My baby," she said. Please, my baby. Cannon arrived beside him, already pulling off his cut to cover her legs. Former defense attorney disbarred 7 years ago for breaking a prosecutor's nose in a courthouse hallway. A story that varied in detail depending on who was telling it and how many drinks had been consumed. Now he was the club's voice of reason and the closest thing to a medical professional they had on two wheels. He'd spent enough time around emergency rooms to know what to look for. He looked now, and what he found made his face go very still. She's going into labor, he said quietly, or close to it. No. The woman's grip on Rafe's arm tightened. No, it's too early. 7 weeks. Please, it's too early. We need to move her, Cannon said. Mercy Ridge. How fast can we get there? 20 minutes if we push it. Push it. Rafe looked at her. What's your name? Delia. She exhaled the word like it cost her something. Delia Wren. Delia, I'm Rafe. We're going to take you to the hospital now. Your baby is going to be okay. I need you to believe that. She looked at him for a long moment. In the flashlight beam, her eyes were very clear, very present, despite everything. Why are you helping me? She asked. You don't know me. Doesn't matter, Rafe said. He lifted her as carefully as he'd ever lifted anything in his life. She was lighter than she should have been, and he felt her flinch when he shifted her weight ribs, probably. He filed that away without showing it. She pressed her face against his chest, and he felt her breath coming in short, controlled bursts, the kind of breathing someone did when they were managing pain they couldn't afford to show. At the top of the embankment, the brothers had cleared a path without being asked. Sledge had already pulled the chase van around rear doors, opened the interior dim and close. Rafe carried her to it and climbed in. Cannon came in behind him, the medical kit already open, hands moving fast and certain. Mercy Ridge, Rafe said to the driver. Then louder out the open door to the men gathered on the road. We ride. Anyone gets in our way, they move or we go through them. This woman lives. Her baby lives. Questions come later. 20 engines started. The convoy moved. Mercy Ridge Hospital sat on the south edge of Bridgewater County like it had been put there as an afterthought, 3 stories of concrete and glass emergency bay on the east side parking lot, badly lit and half empty at this hour. Rafe had been here before. Brothers with broken bones, a knife wound, once the night Cannon had a heart scare that turned out to be nothing but had aged them all 10 years in 3 hours. He'd never arrived the way he arrived now. Vans squealing into the emergency bay. Bike engines still echoing in the covered drive. 20 men in leather converging on the entrance. The nurses scattered. Then they froze. Then one of them, older gray at the temples, the kind of face that had seen most things and stopped being surprised by them, stepped forward with her chin up and her eyes already calculating. What do we have? Pregnant woman trauma, Rafe said. Baby's early, roughly 7 weeks. She's got broken ribs, maybe more. The nurse looked past him at Delia, and something in her professional assessment shifted. Whatever calculation she'd been running about the men in leather, she set it aside entirely. Get her inside, now. A gurney appeared. Cannon rattled off everything he'd observed in the van. Vital signs, responsiveness, the injuries he'd cataloged and the ones he suspected. The trauma team took over and Delia disappeared through a set of double doors with the gurney and 4 people moving fast around her. Rafe stood at the doors and watched them close. A security guard materialized at his shoulder. Sir, family only past this point. I'm the reason she's alive. I understand that, but hospital policy is going to have to wait. Rafe looked at the man, not threatening, just certain. Find out who her doctor is. Tell them I need to know she's okay. The guard hesitated, then went. The brothers filtered into the waiting room. It was a large space, but not large enough for 20 iron wolves, and the handful of other people present. A young man with a sleeping child on his lap, an elderly couple holding hands, a woman reading something on her phone, looked up and then looked away with the careful, studied indifference of people deciding not to have a problem. Rafe didn't blame them. He knew what they looked like. He'd known it for 30 years. He sat down in a chair by the window and looked at his hands. There was blood on them. Delia's blood drying into the creases of his knuckles, dark as old rust. He didn't wipe it off. He sat with it and thought about the guardrail bent outward and the tire marks going over the edge and the way she'd said, "He's coming back to finish it," with the certainty of someone who knew exactly the man she was talking about. Cannon sat down beside him. "She's going to be okay," he said. "She's tough." "She had broken ribs before she went over that cliff," Rafe said. "I felt them when I picked her up. The impact didn't do that." Cannon said nothing for a moment. "I know. Someone kicked her or hit her before the crash." "Yes." The word landed between them and stayed there. 3 hours passed. The waiting room emptied and emptied again. The elderly couple left. The young man's child woke up and was taken somewhere. A man came in holding a wrapped hand and sat bleeding quietly in a corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency Rafe had come to associate with bad news and long waits, and the exhaustion that came from caring about something you couldn't control. The brothers took turns. Some went out to smoke. Sledge made 3 trips to the vending machine and distributed the results without comment. Cannon sat with Rafe for the first hour and then moved around checking in with the men, keeping the temperature down. He was good at that. Always had been. At 20 minutes past 5 in the morning, a doctor came through the double doors. She was young, late 30s maybe, and wore the exhaustion of someone who had been doing hard things for many consecutive hours. Her scrubs were spotted in ways Rafe didn't examine closely. She looked around the waiting room, found him by some instinct he didn't question, and walked over. "Are you with Delia Wren?" Rafe stood. "How is she?" "She's stable. Fractured ribs, 4 of them. Collapsed lung, which we've addressed. Significant blood loss." She paused. "We performed an emergency cesarean section." The room seemed to contract around him. "The baby," Rafe said. "She's alive." The doctor's voice softened slightly, the professional armor thinning just enough to let something human through. "A girl, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. She's in the NICU. It's going to be a difficult road for a while. She's 7 weeks premature. Her lungs need support, but she is breathing. She's fighting." Rafe exhaled. He hadn't realized how much air he'd been holding until it left him. "Can I see Delia?" "She's been asking for you." The doctor tilted her head. "She won't stop asking for the man who found her." He followed her through the doors. The room was quiet except for the beeping of monitors and the low hiss of equipment. Delia looked smaller in the hospital bed than she had in the ravine, smaller and somehow more present. The fight stripped of its urgency now and replaced by something raw and exhausted. She had tubes and wires running everywhere. Her face was pale as birch bark, but her eyes were open. "You came back," she said. Rafe pulled a chair to the bedside and sat. "I said I would." "People say things. I mean what I say." He looked at her steadily. "It's a rule I keep." She was quiet for a moment. Her gaze moved to his cut, the Iron Wolves patch, the president's rocker, the accumulated history of 12 years stitched into leather. "I've heard things about your club," she said. "Most of them are wrong." "Are you dangerous?" "To people who deserve it." Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly, more like recognition, like she'd asked a question before and gotten a very different answer. "My husband," she said. Preston Vane." She said the name carefully like it had weight, and she wanted to be precise about where she set it down. "He drove us off that road. He unbuckled my seatbelt, and he drove us off." Her voice was level and very controlled, the voice of someone who had made a decision to be clear above all things. "He'd planned it. The brake lines, I don't know when, but he'd done something to the brakes. We weren't going to stop no matter what happened. He opened the door and he pushed me out before we hit the rail." Rafe listened without moving. "He did it for money," Delia said. "My mother left me a trust. $37 million locked until I turn 33. That's 8 months from now. If I die before I turn 33, Preston inherits as next of kin. If there's a child and the child survives, he becomes the trustee until she reaches adulthood." She paused. He'd thought it through, every angle. He'd thought it all the way through. Who is his father? Rafe asked. He kept his voice even. Delia looked at him. Judge Warren Vane. He's been on the county bench for 30 years. He controls the police, the prosecutors, half the local government. She searched his face. You know that name. Rafe was silent for a moment. I know it, he said. He didn't say more than that. Not yet. He sat with what she'd told him and with what he already knew. And he felt the two things click together like the tumblers of a lock, quiet and precise and final. Judge Warren Vane. The man who had sat on a high bench in a courtroom in this county 18 years ago and looked at Rafe's brother Tommy with the measured patience of a man performing a civic duty. 23 years old Tommy had been, dating a girl who turned out to have cousins in places that mattered to the Vane family. They'd had an argument, the ordinary, forgettable argument of two young people who cared about each other too much and communicated it too badly, and the girl had gone to her family, and her family had gone to Warren Vane, and Warren Vane had arranged for the argument to become assault and battery, 15 years no possibility of parole for the first 8. Tommy had died in the 3rd year. Prison official report said suicide. Rafe had never believed it, had no proof to offer against it, just the absolute knowledge of his brother's character and the hollow certainty that Tommy had not been a man who quit. The man who had done that was the father of the man who had pushed a pregnant woman off a cliff tonight. Rafe had a lot of things he could say about that. He chose to say none of them. My daughter, Delia said. The word came out tender and a little frightened the way important words sometimes did. I named her Hope. The nurse said she needed a name to put on the NICU board, something to fight for. Her eyes found his. I haven't held her. I haven't even. She was born and they took her and I haven't held her yet. You will, Rafe said. What if she doesn't? She's going to make it. He said it the way he said everything important, without decoration, without softening, without the hedging that people used when they weren't sure. Because she's got you for a mother, and you're still here. Delia looked at him for a long moment. You're very sure about things you can't know. Some things you know anyway. Outside the room, through the small window in the door, Rafe could see the hallway beginning to brighten as the hospital shifted from night staff to morning. Somewhere down that hallway, a baby named Hope was breathing with assistance and fighting with everything she had. Somewhere outside these walls, the sun was coming up over Bridgewater County, Virginia. And then he saw them. 2 men in suits moving down the hallway with purpose. A third man just behind them, taller, dressed better. His face arranged in an expression that Rafe recognized immediately. Not grief, but the performance of grief. The careful calibration of a man who knew he was being watched and understood that appearances were a form of armor. Preston Vane was handsome the way certain kinds of danger were handsome. Clean jaw, dark hair, the kind of face people trusted at funerals and charity dinners. He was perhaps 35, fit, wearing a suit that cost more than most men in this county made in a month. His eyes were red in a way that could have been crying or could have been something applied in a car mirror on the way over. Rafe stood up. That's him, Delia breathed. The word was barely sound. That's Preston. Stay here. Rafe moved to the door. Don't open this for anyone. He stepped into the hallway. Preston stopped when he saw him. The 2 suited men lawyers, by the look of them, stopped just behind. Preston's expression shifted, recalibrated, settled into something wounded and confused before it had fully settled. You're the one who found her, Preston said. His voice was steady and warm and absolutely without truth. I've been looking for her all night. I heard there was an accident. I've been sick with worry. She told me what happened, Rafe said. She's confused. She's been through something traumatic. She told me what happened, Rafe said again. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step closer, just held his ground in his gaze. She told me about the brake lines, about the seat belt, about you opening the door. Something crossed Preston's face, too fast for anyone who wasn't watching for it. But Rafe was watching. That's an extraordinary thing to claim, Preston said, recovering smoothly. My wife has a history of mental health struggles. The pregnancy has made things significantly worse. I love her. I've tried everything to support her. This is whatever she's told you. She believes it, but she's not. She's not what Rafe said. Preston looked at him with the patient tolerance of a man explaining something obvious to someone incapable of understanding it. She's not well. It breaks my heart to say it, but it's the truth, the documented truth. He turned to one of the lawyers who produced a folder. My wife has a medical record going back 3 years. Anxiety, depression periods of significant instability. The idea that I would ever harm her or my child. Your child is in the NICU, Rafe said. 3 pounds, 7 weeks early, fighting for her life. Preston's mask stayed in place. I know, and I want to see her. I want to be with my daughter and my wife, and I'm asking you respectfully, sincerely to step aside and let me do that. Rafe didn't move. Sir, one of the lawyers stepped forward. You have no legal standing here. Mr. Vane is the patient's husband and the child's father. He has every right. He has the right to stand in this hallway and wait, Rafe said, just like everyone else. He held Preston's gaze for another moment, long enough to let the man know that the performance wasn't working, that someone in this building could see through it, and that someone was not going to move. Then he stepped back into Delia's room and closed the door. She was sitting up, her face gray with effort and something worse than pain. He's performing, she said. He's very good at it. I know. He'll have lawyers. His father will have lawyers. They'll file things, make arguments. Let them. Rafe sat back down. What matters right now is that you're here and Hope is here. Everything else comes after. Delia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. You're very calm. Not on the inside. She almost smiled. It came and went fast, but it was real. His father, Rafe said carefully. Judge Warren Vane. What do you know about him? Everything, Delia said. I lived in that family for 5 years. I know exactly how Warren Vane operates. He controls this county the way other men control a business, systematically, completely, with complete deniability. The police chief owes him. The county prosecutor owes him. Half the judges in the district have been installed by him or protected by him. Her voice was flat with the flatness of someone who has said something so many times in their head that emotion has worn it smooth. There is no one in Bridgewater County that he can't reach. There is no institution here that he hasn't compromised. What about federal level? She looked at him. What do you mean FBI, federal jurisdiction? Anything that crosses county lines that's outside Warren Vane's reach. Delia was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I never had anyone in my corner before. I didn't know where to look. Rafe took out his phone. Cannon answered on the second ring. I need 2 things, Rafe said. First, get Sarah Delwood on the phone. Now. Yes, I know what time it is. Wake her up. Second, I need you to find a man named Gerald Foss. He was an attorney, semi-retired, I think. He represented Delia's mother. He looked at Delia, who nodded. I don't have an address. Find him. Who's Sarah Delwood? Delia asked when he hung up. Former public defender. She took on your husband's family in court 5 years ago. Lost, but she didn't fold. Rafe put the phone in his pocket. She's the only lawyer in this county who won't be bought before noon. Delia stared at him. You're already moving. That's what I do. You don't even know if any of this will work. No, Rafe agreed, but sitting still doesn't work, so we move. Cannon called back 12 minutes later. Sarah Delwood was on her way. Gerald Foss was located semi-retired, living outside a town called Westbrook, 40 minutes from Mercy Ridge. A brother named Holt was already on his bike. And then at 6:47 in the morning, Cannon called again. His voice was different this time, careful, the voice he used when the news required it. Rafe, Judge Warren Vane just signed 2 orders. Emergency psychiatric hold for Delia effective as soon as she can be transferred. And temporary custody of the infant granted to Preston Vane. A pause. Deadline for compliance is noon. Rafe stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot, where the first gray light of morning was beginning to separate the cars from the shadows. His reflection floated faint and ghost-like in the glass. "How long until Sarah gets here?" he asked. 20 minutes. And Foss, Holtzen wrote, he'll have him in 40. Rafe did the math. 5 hours and 13 minutes until noon. 5 hours to find a way through a system that had been built by a man who understood systems the way a surgeon understood the body, knew exactly where to cut to make something stop working, exactly where to apply pressure to make something comply. He thought about Tommy, thought about a courtroom 18 years ago, and a sentence delivered with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never expected to be held accountable for anything he did. Then he turned away from the window. "Tell Sarah I need a motion filed before 9, he said, "and tell her what we're up against. All of it. She's going to need more than a motion to beat a bench order from Warren Vane. I know, that's why we need Foss." Rafe moved to the door. "And Cannon, keep the men calm. No confrontations, no provocations. Preston is going to be out there performing for anyone who'll watch. I don't want him to have anything to point to." "Understood." He hung up and went back to Delia. She was awake, sitting straighter than she should have been. Her jaw set with the expression of someone who had decided that pain was not relevant to the current situation. She looked at his face when he came in and read it the way people read faces when they'd learned that expressions were the only honest language they were going to get. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He gave her all of it without softening the psychiatric hold, the custody order, the noon deadline. He watched her absorb it the way a building absorbed wind bending but not breaking. Her face went very still. Her hands folded on the blanket went white at the knuckles. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "He planned this too," she said. "This was part of it. If I survived, this was the contingency. Take me out of the picture legally while I'm too weak to fight." She looked at Rafe. He thought of everything. "Almost everything," Rafe said. What did he miss? Rafe thought about 20 engines on a foggy highway, about a flashlight finding a white dress in the dark, about the chance of it or the purpose of it depending on what you believed about such things. "He didn't plan on us being on that road tonight," Rafe said. Delia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she straightened her spine slowly with effort, with the visible cost of it, and she said, "Tell me what I need to do." Sarah Delwood arrived at 7:20. Small, precise, with close-cropped hair and eyes that missed nothing and apologized for nothing. She shook Rafe's hand, once looked at Delia for exactly long enough to see what she needed to see, and sat down. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Delia told her. All of it. Her voice was steady throughout, steadier than it had been when she told Rafe, as if each time she said it, the story became a little more hers and a little less something that had happened to her against her will. Sarah took notes in handwriting so small and tight it looked like code. She asked 3 questions, sharp, specific, cutting to exactly the information she needed. When Delia finished, Sarah looked at Rafe. "Filing a motion to challenge the psychiatric hold," she said. "I'll argue procedural grounds the order bypassed the required clinical evaluation process. It won't hold forever, but it'll buy time." She paused. "The custody order is harder. Warren Vane has the authority to sign it, and reversing it requires either evidence of misconduct or a higher court override. Neither of those happens by noon." "Then we need more time," Rafe said. "I can try for a federal jurisdiction argument. If there's any federal angle wire fraud, civil rights violation, anything that crosses state lines." "There is," Rafe said. "Or there might be. There's a man named Gerald Foss. He knew Delia's mother handled her estate. I think he has information that changes the scope of this case." He looked at Sarah. "I need until I can get him here." Sarah thought for a moment. "File at 9, delay any hearing until 11 if we're lucky." She stood. "I'll need an hour." She left. Rafe and Cannon spent the next 4 hours working. They moved through the hospital carefully and methodically, Cannon speaking to the nurses, who had admitted Delia gathering observations about the nature of her injuries, the pattern of them, the things that couldn't have happened the way an accident would have made them happen. Rafe spoke to the hospital administrator, a nervous man named Dunn, who had Warren Vane's name on a donor plaque in his wall, and the expression of someone who had been managing conflicts of interest for years and wasn't sure he could manage one more. Rafe didn't threaten him. He just told him the truth about what was in Delia's chart and what those records meant and what would happen to a man who allowed evidence to be altered or lost. He said it quietly, and he said it once, and he left Dunn with his hands shaking and the clear understanding that neutrality was no longer an available option. At 11:45, the news came back from the courthouse the local judge had refused to hear Sarah's motion. Procedural grounds. Decision final. The noon deadline was still in effect, and at the same moment, Cannon's phone buzzed with a message from Sledge, who was watching the main entrance from the parking lot. Preston Vane had just arrived at the hospital gate. He had two men in Bridgewater County Sheriff's uniforms with him, and a document in his hand, and the expression of a man who had already won. Rafe came out of the elevator at a walk, not a run. Running was panic, and panic was exactly what Preston Vane wanted to see. The lobby was bright with morning light. In the busy stillness of a hospital at shift change, nurses moving between stations, an orderly pushing an empty wheelchair, a family of four clustered near the information desk, looking lost in the way that families look lost when they just received news that rearranged everything they thought they knew. Rafe moved through all of it without touching it, his focus already narrowed to the main entrance and the figures visible through the glass doors. Sledge was waiting by the corridor that led to the emergency wing. Arms folded, his face doing the thing it did when he was working very hard to look relaxed. He was 6'4" and 260 pounds and had never once in 20 years managed to actually look relaxed, but he kept trying. "Two deputies," Sledge said quietly as Rafe reached him. "Kendricks and that new one, Burrell, both Pruitt's men. Sheriff Dale Pruitt, another name on the long list of people in Bridgewater County who owed their positions to Warren Vane." Rafe had never had direct dealings with Pruitt, but he knew the type of man who had made a series of small compromises over a long career until the compromises had become the career itself. "Where's Cannon?" Coming down the stairs, Sarah's still on her phone trying to reach the federal clerk's office. "And the brothers? 8 in the waiting room, rest are outside spread around the building." Sledge paused. "Nobody's armed, like you said." "Good, keep it that way." The main doors opened and Preston came through, first the two deputies a half step behind. He'd changed suits since the early morning. This one was a darker gray, more somber, more appropriate for a man presenting himself as a grieving father, seeking access to his critically ill wife. He held a folded document at his side with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to paperwork being the last word in any argument. He saw Rafe and stopped. Something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, more like the calculation of a chess player who had anticipated this piece being on this square and was now confirming it. He reset his expression to sorrowful and reasonable before he'd fully stopped moving. "Mr. Harlan," he said, "I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot." "We got off on exactly the right foot," Rafe said. "You know where your wife is. You know what condition she's in. You know that she's told me what happened on that road. There's no wrong foot here. There's just what happened." "What she believes happened," Preston said gently. "I understand why she's confused. I truly do. The trauma alone." "Deputy Kendricks." Rafe looked past Preston at the taller of the two officers. He knew Kendricks by sight, had seen him at the gas station on Route 9, at the diner on Millhaven Road. A middle-aged man, not unkind-looking, with the careful eyes of someone who had learned to keep his own counsel. "You've been a deputy in this county for, what, 16 years? Kendricks didn't answer right away. He looked at Preston, then back at Rafe. 17, he said finally. 17 years. You've seen things in that time. You know this county." Rafe kept his voice level, conversational. "What I'm asking you is whether you're here because you believe in what you're doing, or whether you're here because you were told to be here." "That's not irrelevant." one of Preston's lawyers started. I'm talking to the deputy, Rafe said without heat. Kendrick's jaw tightened. He looked at the document in Preston's hand, then at the hospital around them. Then at some middle distance that wasn't any of it. He was running calculations, the kind that only took seconds, but contained years. He didn't answer the question, but he didn't move toward Rafe either. Preston stepped forward. I have a valid court order signed by Judge Warren Vane granting me immediate access to my wife and temporary custody of my daughter. I'm asking you to honor it. That's all. I'm not looking for a confrontation. I'm a husband and a father, and I'm frightened for my family, and I would very much like to see them. His voice was extraordinary. Rafe had to give him that. If he hadn't been in that ravine, if he hadn't seen Delia's hand reaching upward through the mud and glass, if he hadn't felt the shape of those broken ribs when he lifted her, if he hadn't had all of that, Preston Vane's voice might have been enough. Cannon appeared at Rafe's shoulder. Behind them through the corridor, 3 more iron wolves had come to stand at the edge of the lobby without being asked. Not moving forward, just present, just making the arithmetic of the situation clear to anyone who was counting. The court order is being challenged, Cannon said. He had his disbarred attorney's voice on, precise and hurried, the voice of a man who knew the difference between the law and the practice of it. Emergency motion filed at 9:17 this morning in Federal District Court. Until that motion is resolved, the order's enforceability is an open question. That's not how it works, one of the lawyers said. That's exactly how it works, Cannon said pleasantly. Would you like to call the federal clerk's office and confirm I have the case number? Preston's composed expression held, but something behind it shifted. This is harassment, he said. You are preventing a man from seeing his critically ill wife. You are preventing a father from seeing his premature daughter who may not... His voice caught. Perfectly timed. Who may not survive. And you're doing it based on the delusions of a woman who has been medically documented as unstable. The medical documentation you're referring to, Cannon said, was compiled primarily by a physician who has received 3 referral payments from a medical practice co-owned by Warren Vane in the last 2 years. We found that this morning. Took about 40 minutes. The lobby went quiet enough that Rafe could hear the hum of the elevator. Preston looked at Cannon for a moment, then he looked at Rafe, and for just a second, just a fraction of one, Rafe saw it. Not fear exactly, something that lived next to fear. The recognition of a man who has constructed something very carefully, discovering that someone has been examining the joints. It was there, and then it wasn't. Deputy Kendricks, Preston set his voice back to its sorrowful precision. Please do your job. Kendricks moved forward 1 step, then stopped. He looked at the brothers in the corridor, looked at Preston, looked at the document in Preston's hand. His mouth opened and closed once. Mr. Vane, he said slowly, given the open federal motion, I'm not comfortable enforcing this order until that's resolved. Preston turned to look at him fully. Excuse me. I'm not comfortable, Kendricks repeated. His voice had found something in it, not quite firmness, but the beginning of it. You can call Sheriff Pruitt if you want a different answer. Preston stared at him for a long moment with the cold fury of someone who has never been told no by someone he considered a tool. Then he turned back to Rafe and the performance fell away just for a moment, just enough. You think you're protecting her, he said quietly. You're not. You're making this worse. Everything you do here makes it worse for her. Every time you interfere, you give my father more reason to come down harder. You have no idea what he's capable of. I have some idea, Rafe said. Preston looked at him with something that might in another man have been curiosity. You think this is about your brother, he said. That's what this is, isn't it? You think helping my wife settle some old score. Rafe said nothing. Your brother was convicted on evidence, Preston said. He was sentenced by the law. What happened to him afterward? Was not suicide, Rafe said. I know that. I've known it for 15 years. I just didn't have proof. Something changed in Preston's face. It was small, barely visible. But it was there, the flicker of a man who has just realized that the other man knows more than he should. Preston straightened his suit jacket, looked at his lawyers, looked at the deputies, made the calculation that today was not the day, and made it look like a choice rather than a retreat. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Rafe agreed. "It isn't." Preston left. The lawyers followed. Kendricks waited until they were through the doors and then looked at Rafe with the expression of a man who has just stepped off a ledge and is still waiting to find out whether the ground is close or far. "That order's still valid," Kendricks said, "until the federal motion resolves." "I know," Rafe said. "Thank you for what you did." Kendricks looked like he wanted to say something else. He didn't. He followed the others out. Cannon exhaled beside him. "That buys us hours, not days." "Hours is what we need." Rafe turned. "Any word from Holt?" "He's got Foss. 40 minutes out. Tell him to push it to 30. He went back upstairs to Delia. She knew from his face that Preston had come and gone, and she knew from the fact that Rafe was standing and not in handcuffs that it hadn't gone the way Preston had intended. She let out a breath that seemed to have been waiting since early morning. "How long?" she asked. "Until the federal motion resolves. Hours, probably. Maybe until tomorrow morning, if Sarah can find the right argument. And then we need something stronger than a procedural challenge." He sat down. "Tell me about Gerald Foss, your mother's lawyer." Delia looked at her hands. "He handled her estate after she died. Before that, he was her personal attorney for about 20 years. He knew her, really knew her, not just the legal facts of her life." She paused. "He came to see me once 6 months after I married Preston. Just showed up at the house. Preston was there and he was very polite about it, very smooth, and Gerald left after about 10 minutes. But before he went, when Preston was out of the room for a moment, Gerald looked at me and he said very quietly, 'I'm keeping records. If you ever need them, call me.'" She looked up. "I never called. I was afraid of what it would mean, afraid of what Preston would do if he found out." "What kind of records?" Rafe asked. "I don't know. I never asked." Her jaw tightened. "I should have asked." "You were surviving," Rafe said. "That's different from everything else." Cannon appeared in the doorway. "Holt just called. 20 minutes. He's bringing Foss directly here." Rafe nodded, looked at Delia. "Rest until he gets here. Whatever happens next, you're going to need to be clear." "I'm clear now." "Clearer then." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he was getting used to, the look of someone recalibrating their understanding of what people were capable of. Then she settled back against the pillow, not in surrender, but in the deliberate conservation of someone who understood that strength was a resource that needed managing. Rafe went to find Sledge. The plan had come to him in pieces throughout the morning, assembling itself the way plans sometimes did not, from one big idea, but from the accumulation of small observations until suddenly the shape of it was there. He'd been turning it over since Cannon had mentioned the impound lot in passing. The car, Preston's car, which was currently sitting in the Bridgewater County impound facility 3 miles east of the hospital. The car that had gone over the edge of Highway 9 with its brake lines cut and its seat adjusted for a man and not a woman, and its passenger side airbag deployed evidence that told a story very different from the one Preston Vane had been telling since 6 in the morning. Evidence that would not survive long once the right people understood it existed. "Tonight," Rafe said to Sledge outside in the stairwell where the sound wouldn't carry. "After midnight, you and me." Sledge looked at him with the patient expression of a man who had agreed to most of Rafe's ideas over 20 years and was still here to tell about it. "The impound lot. Yes. That's breaking and entering at minimum. Evidence tampering if we touch anything. We don't touch anything. We document. Photos, every detail. Seat position, airbag deployment, brake lines if we can get to them without moving the car. We get in, we document, we get out. And the photos? Canon uploads them to a secure server the moment they're taken, not on either of our phones. Somewhere no one can confiscate." Rafe looked at him. "If the car disappears before we get there, we have nothing. If we wait for a legal process, the car disappears. So we go tonight." Sledge was quiet for a moment. "Rafe, If Preston or his father finds out we're going, then we need to make sure they don't find out until it's too late to matter. Rafe held his gaze. I know what I'm asking. Sledge nodded once. That was all he ever needed to say. Gerald Foss arrived at 11:40. He was 72 years old and looked it in the way that some men look their age, not diminished by it, but fully arrived at it, as if every year had deposited something rather than taken something away. Silver-haired, wearing a suit that had been good once and was now simply comfortable with the careful movements of a man who had learned not to waste energy on anything that didn't require it. He took one look at Delia, and his face did something complicated. You look like your mother, he said quietly, when she was frightened. Was she frightened often? Delia asked. In the years she was involved with the Vane family's affairs, yes. He sat down and opened a soft leather briefcase that had seen decades of use. I'm told time is short, so let me be direct. He was. For the next 40 minutes, Gerald Foss laid out 30 years of documentation with the methodical clarity of someone who had assembled it piece by piece over decades, knowing that someday it would need to be presented quickly and completely to someone who needed all of it at once. Payments from Warren Vane's personal accounts to Sheriff Dale Pruitt going back 14 years. Not large amounts, nothing traceable as a bribe to anyone who wasn't specifically looking, but consistent, regular corresponding to specific dates in specific cases that Foss had cross-referenced with court records over many careful years. Cases where evidence had gone missing, cases where witnesses had recanted, cases where the Vane family name appeared somewhere in the background. 3 witnesses who had been prepared to testify against Warren Vane in a judicial misconduct proceeding 9 years ago, all 3 had subsequently relocated out of state, all 3 within 6 months of the proceeding being quietly dropped. And then the file that Gerald placed on the bed, last separated from the others, in a manila envelope that had been handled so many times the edges were soft. Tommy Harlan, he said. Rafe went very still. I became aware of his case 4 years after the sentencing, Foss said. He didn't look at Rafe when he said it. He looked at the envelope. I was reviewing other Vane-adjacent cases and I found the anomalies. The witness whose testimony changed between deposition and trial. The evidence log with entries that didn't correspond to anything in the physical record. The sentencing itself, which was even for Warren Vane extraordinarily severe for the stated charges. He opened the envelope and laid out 3 sheets of paper. I began making inquiries, carefully because by that point I understood exactly who I was inquiring about. He paused. Tommy Harlan died in his 3rd year of incarceration. Officially suicide by hanging in his cell at approximately 2 in the morning. I know the official version, Rafe said. His voice came out level. It took effort. There are 2 things the official record doesn't mention. Foss indicated the first sheet. Tommy's cellmate at the time was a man named Curtis Delray, serving 12 years for aggravated assault. Delray was transferred to a federal facility in West Virginia 8 months after Tommy's death. He received a sentencing reduction of 4 years as part of an undocumented agreement. Undocumented by whom? By everyone in the official record. But I found the paperwork. It exists poorly filed, buried in a federal transfer record, but it exists. Foss indicated the second sheet. Delray is currently serving the remainder of his sentence at a federal correctional facility in Alderson, West Virginia. He has never spoken publicly about Tommy Harlan, but 3 years ago, he filed a complaint through the prison chaplain, alleging that he had been coerced into an undisclosed action as a condition of his transfer. The room was very quiet. The chaplain's report went nowhere, Foss said, but I have a copy. He looked up at Rafe for the first time since he'd opened the envelope. Your brother didn't die by his own hand. I've believed that for many years. I don't have enough to prove it in a criminal court, but I have enough to make a federal investigator very interested in looking considerably harder. Rafe looked at the papers on the bed, looked at them for a long time without speaking. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Delia had gone very quiet beside him. Why didn't you come to me with this before, Rafe asked. Because I needed a case that could open the door, Foss said simply. A living victim. Someone willing to testify with injuries that couldn't be explained away with a clear financial motive, pointing directly at the Vane family. Everything I have is documentary, its patterns and inferences and buried paperwork. It needs to be attached to something direct, something current, something a federal prosecutor can stand up in court with. He looked at Delia. I needed her. Delia said nothing for a moment. Then, you've been waiting for someone like me. I've been waiting for the Vane family to make a mistake large enough to leave a victim who could speak, Foss said. They've been careful for 30 years. Preston was less careful than his father, or perhaps more arrogant. In my experience, those qualities often travel together. There's an FBI field agent in Richmond. Foss continued, reaching into the briefcase again. Renee Cobb. She has been waiting with considerably more official resources than I have for exactly this kind of opening. I spoke with her this morning before your man arrived to collect me. He placed a business card on the bed beside the documents. She wants to talk to you, both of you, as soon as possible. Rafe picked up the card, looked at it, set it down. The noon deadline, he said. I know, Sarah tells me the motion is holding for now, but it won't hold past tomorrow morning. Foss closed his briefcase. Mr. Harlan, what I'm offering you is a path, but it requires the next 48 hours to go correctly. The FBI needs time to mobilize. Agent Cobb needs to establish jurisdiction. If anything happens in those 48 hours that gives the Vane family grounds to remove Delia from your protection, if Preston gets a legal foothold, if there's any incident that allows them to characterize your club as a criminal threat, there won't be, Rafe said. I need to know that with certainty. Rafe looked at him steadily. There won't be an incident. You have my word. Foss held his gaze for a moment, measuring something. Whatever he found seemed to satisfy him. He nodded once and stood. I'll be in contact with Agent Cobb this afternoon. Expect to hear from her by evening. He left. Delia looked at Rafe. The afternoon light was coming through the window now at a long angle, the kind of light that belonged to the latter part of a day that had been going too long already. Your brother, she said softly. Yes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, Rafe said. Be a witness. That night at 12 past midnight, Rafe and Sledge went over the chain-link fence at the Bridgewater County Impound Facility. The lot was 3 acres of crushed gravel and accumulated misery stacked with cars at various stages of legal complication. One guard, one camera setup that Sledge had scouted the previous afternoon and confirmed hadn't been serviced in at least a year. The kind of facility that existed in every small county in America, underfunded, under-maintained, staffed by someone who had drawn the short straw and was waiting out the shift. They moved through it in the dark with small flashlights held close to the ground, checking tags until they found the car. It was a silver sedan, 4-door, the passenger side cratered where it had struck the boulder on the way down. The driver's side door was still hanging open from where it had been left. Glass everywhere. The smell of old fuel and something chemical underneath. Rafe pulled on the gloves he'd brought and stood at the open driver's door. The seat was pushed back as far as it would go. Rafe looked at that for a long time. Delia was 5'4". He'd carried her, knew her build, knew what her reach would have been to the pedals and wheel from this position. She couldn't have driven the car from this seat. It would have been physically impossible. Start with the seat, he said quietly. Sledge's phone was already out, camera running. They documented everything. The seat position, the driver's side airbag deployed and the steering wheel free of any blood, any glass fragment, any trace of the impact that should have been there if a person's face and hands had been near it at speed. The passenger side airbag deployed as well, and the dashboard on that side was marked with the pattern of impact with a dark stain that Rafe knew before Sledge confirmed it with the flashlight. Delia's blood. On the passenger side. And then Sledge crouched at the front of the car and looked up from underneath, and his voice changed. Rafe. Rafe moved to him and crouched and looked. The brake line. Not frayed, not worn, not damaged by the impact. Cut. Clean at one end and then frayed to disguise it, but the initial cut was there, the beginning of it, before the fray sharp and deliberate. Someone had made the first cut carefully and then torn the rest to make it look like mechanical failure. "You need to see this too," Sledge said, moving the flashlight further back along the undercarriage. The secondary line was the same. Both lines, both cut at the source, both disguised with mechanical-looking damage overlaid on the initial incision. It would have fooled a cursory inspection. It would not fool a forensic engineer looking specifically for it. "Get all of it," Rafe said. "Every angle." Sledge documented for 11 minutes. Every photograph uploaded to Canon's secure server in real time as it was taken. By the time they were done, there were 47 images of a car that told a story that Preston Vane had tried very hard to make disappear. They were moving back toward the fence when the light came on. Not the guard's flashlight. Headlights. Multiple beams coming through the main gate, which was swinging open on its electric hinge. Rafe and Sledge went still. 3 vehicles, 2 of them county police. One of them a dark SUV that he recognized before its door opened. Preston Vane stepped out. He was dressed differently than he'd been at the hospital casual clothing now, like a man who had been called away from home in the night. But his face in the headlight wash was entirely composed. He looked around the impound lot with the measured patience of someone who had known exactly where to look and had been looking forward to this. "Mr. Harlan," he said, his voice carried easily across the gravel, "I was hoping you'd be thorough. Thorough men take longer. It gave us time to get here." Rafe stepped forward, away from the fence, away from Sledge, drawing the attention toward himself. "You had the lot watched," he said. "I had the lot watched since this afternoon," Preston said, "when I realized what you'd found in that vehicle and what you'd do about it." He walked slowly across the gravel, hands in his jacket pockets. "It doesn't matter, you know. Even if you got photographs, and I assume you did, evidence obtained this way is inadmissible. You've broken into a secured facility. You've tampered with a crime scene. Any lawyer worth the bar exam could have it thrown out before lunch. Federal investigators can look at the same car," Rafe said, "legally using what we've found as a starting point. That would require federal jurisdiction." Preston stopped 10 feet away. "Which requires a federal case. Which requires time that you don't have." He looked at Rafe with something that was almost genuine curiosity. "I want to understand you. I've been trying to understand you since this morning. You found a stranger in a ditch. You don't know her. You have no obligation to her. And yet here you are at 1 in the morning in an impound lot destroying yourself for her." He shook his head slightly. "What is that?" "You wouldn't understand it," Rafe said, "because I'm not a good person." Preston smiled thinly. "I don't think it's that simple. I think you're doing this for your brother. I think this is what you couldn't do for Tommy, and you've decided she's the substitute." He watched Rafe's face carefully. "Am I wrong?" Rafe said nothing. "Your brother was weak," Preston said. He said it the way someone might note a fact about weather informatively without heat or particular interest. "He didn't have the constitution for what he faced. My father made that observation at the time. Said it was the easiest sentencing he ever gave because the man seemed to have already accepted it before the gavel came down." He tilted his head. "Weak blood runs in families, they say. I've always thought that was probably—" Rafe hit him. One movement, no wind-up, his right fist connecting with Preston's jaw with 12 years of accumulated weight behind it. Preston went down hard on the gravel, one hand catching himself, his head snapping back. And from everywhere at once, the shadows at the fence line, the spaces between cars, the cab of the nearest police vehicle, people emerged. 4 officers. A camera mounted on the second police vehicle, its red recording light steady and unwavering. It had been on the whole time. Sledge said his name from somewhere behind him, low and urgent. The officers moved in. Rafe didn't run. He stood with his hands where they could be seen and let them come, looking down at Preston, who was sitting up now with blood on his lip and an expression that was beneath the pain, deeply and thoroughly satisfied. "Assault," Preston said to the nearest officer. His voice was calm already. "You have it on camera. All of it." The cuffs went on. Rafe looked at the camera, looked at Preston, looked at the dark above the lot where the stars were faint through the cloud cover, and the night was the kind of cold that came before dawn, decided what it was going to do. He thought about Tommy, about the fact that 47 photographs were already on a server somewhere that Preston Vane could not reach. About Gerald Foss and a woman in Richmond with a federal badge and 7 years of carefully assembled patience. He let them put him in the car. By 4 in the afternoon the following day, Rafe was in the county holding facility with nothing but a concrete bench and the silence of a place designed to make people feel that the world outside had forgotten them entirely. They'd taken his phone, his belt, his boots. The charges assault, trespassing, evidence tampering were being processed with the leisurely efficiency of a system that knew it had time on its side and intended to use all of it. He sat and he thought. He thought about the photographs on Canon's server, about Sarah Delwood, who would have filed every available motion by now, about Delia at the clubhouse, where the brothers had moved her the previous afternoon, about Hope 3 pounds and fighting in the NICU, with federal marshals now stationed at the hospital entrance because Gerald Foss had made a call to Agent Cobb that had apparently moved faster than anyone expected. He thought about Tommy, about a chaplain's report in a federal correctional facility in West Virginia that had gone nowhere for 3 years and was about to go somewhere. He was still thinking about it when the door opened and a guard brought in a man Rafe hadn't expected to see in this room. Gerald Foss set his old briefcase down on the table across from Rafe and sat down with the careful movements of a man managing 72 years of accumulated wear. He looked at Rafe for a moment without speaking. "Cannon called me," he said finally. "I told him not to do anything tonight. He exercised independent judgment. He thought you'd want counsel." Foss clasped his hands on the table. "You hit him on camera?" "Yes." "In front of witnesses and at least 4 law enforcement officers?" "Yes." Foss was quiet for a moment. Was it worth it? Rafe thought about what Preston had said, about Tommy's constitution, about weak blood. He thought about the image of his brother's face at 23 at the sentencing, the way Rafe had watched from the gallery and understood something was happening that he was completely powerless to stop. "Ask me again in 48 hours, he said. Foss almost smiled. "The photographs are secure. Cannon confirmed that before he called me." He opened the briefcase. "Agent Cobb has been briefed. She is motivated." He placed a single sheet of paper on the table. "She's been building a file on Warren Vane for 7 years. The Delray connection, the buried proceedings, the payments to Pruitt, she has parallel documentation on all of it. What she needed was a living victim in a current crime serious enough to establish federal jurisdiction." "Attempted murder," Rafe said. "Attempted murder, fraud, civil rights violations, conspiracy. The photographs you took tonight technically inadmissible in state court, as Preston correctly noted. But a federal investigation isn't bound the same way. Those photographs can inform where federal agents look. And when federal agents look at that car with their own eyes and legal authority, what they find is admissible." "How long?" "Cobb is requesting emergency authorization tonight. Her supervisor is sympathetic he's had the Vane family on a watch list for years. If she gets it..." Foss folded his hands. "She moves tomorrow night. Perhaps the night after." "The assault charge will be managed. Preston provoked you, deliberately followed you to the impound lot, waited for you with a camera running. A competent attorney can make that case." Foss looked at him steadily. "But you need to be out of this cell when Cobb moves. You need to be with Delia." Rafe looked at the ceiling. Somewhere outside these walls in a clubhouse across the county, Delia Wren was sitting up with whatever documents and memories she'd spent the night organizing, assembling her own case with the focused precision of a woman who had decided that surviving was not enough and that she intended to be genuinely useful. He knew this because it was exactly what she would do. He'd known her for less than 2 days. He knew it anyway. "Get me out," he said. "Working on it," Foss said. "Sarah has a bail argument ready. Given the provocation circumstances and your lack of prior record in this state, she's optimistic." He paused. "By tomorrow morning, I expect." Tomorrow morning, Rafe said. Yes. He sat with that, thought about Preston Vane's satisfied expression in the camera's red light, thought about 47 photographs on a server that nobody in this county controlled, thought about a federal agent in Richmond who had been waiting 7 years for exactly the door that had just opened. Foss, he said. The old man looked at him. Tommy, Rafe said, if this works, if Cobb gets what she needs, is there enough for the whole truth to come out? Not just what happened to Delia. What happened to my brother? Foss was quiet for a long moment. Outside the building, the wind moved against something. A mechanical sound hummed briefly and stopped. Yes, Foss said. I believe there is. Rafe nodded once, looked at the table, looked at his hands. When the guard came to take Foss out, Rafe was still sitting exactly as he had been, straight. Still the way a man sat when he had found the thing he had been looking for and was taking a moment to understand that it was real and not something he had constructed to survive the waiting. They released Rafe at 11 in the morning, not because the charges had been dropped, not because anyone in the Bridgewater County system had developed a sudden commitment to fairness or justice or anything resembling either. They released him because Sarah Delwood had spent the night constructing a bail argument so precise and so well documented that the duty magistrate, a man who owed Warren Vane nothing personally and wanted very much to keep it that way, had no procedural grounds to refuse it. The provocation evidence helped considerably. Sledge had recorded the audio of Preston's comments about Tommy on his phone before the confrontation, a detail he had neglected to mention to anyone until Sarah asked the right question at 7 in the morning. Rafe walked out into November, light, thin, and pale, the kind of light that gave everything sharp edges and no warmth. Cannon was waiting with his bike and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Delia, Rafe said. At the clubhouse. She's been up since 4. Cannon handed him the coffee. She asked about you twice, once at 5 and once at 9. Hope, stable, NICU, called this morning. She's off the breathing support for intervals now, doing better than they expected. Cannon looked at him. Federal marshals are still at the hospital. Foss made that call and it stuck. Rafe drank the cold coffee. It was terrible. He finished it anyway. Preston. Quiet since last night. His lawyers filed 3 motions this morning, all in state court. Sarah says they're noise-buying time, making the record look busy. Cannon paused. Warren Vane hasn't made a public statement since yesterday. That's the one that worries me. Me too. They rode to the clubhouse. The November air cut through everything the way it did in this part of Virginia when the season's finally committed, not cold enough to be winter yet, but done pretending it was anything else. The roads were empty at this hour on a weekday, the county going about its business with the practiced indifference of a place that had learned not to notice things it couldn't afford to address openly. Rafe knew this county, had lived on its edges for 20 years, knew which roads flooded in spring, which diners stayed open past midnight, which stretches of highway were watched and which weren't. He knew it the way you knew a difficult neighbor, not with affection, but with the thorough and cautious knowledge of someone who understood that proximity required constant attention. He was going to know it differently after this, one way or another. The clubhouse sat on 6 acres off Route 14 behind a tree line that made it invisible from the road. Originally a farm operation, the main building still had the bones of a large equipment barn. The high ceilings and wide doors domesticated over years into something that was part meeting hall, part garage, part home for men who needed one and hadn't found it anywhere else. The brothers had built most of it themselves over years of weekends that nobody had asked them to spend that way. There were rooms in the back that had housed people in trouble before. Not often, but when it mattered. Delia was at the long table in the main room when Rafe came in, and she was not resting. She had commandeered 3 legal pads and 2 of the brothers' phones and had covered the first pad entirely in close, careful handwriting dates on the left margin, events in the center, names on the right. The second pad was organized differently, more like a map than a timeline, connections drawn between names with arrows and annotations and small notes in the margins. The third was a list, a long one. She looked up when he came in. Something in her face shifted, not relief exactly, more like the acknowledgement of a weight being redistributed, the expression of someone who has been carrying something alone and can now share the load without shame. "You look terrible," she said. "County hospitality," Rafe said. He sat down across from her and looked at the pads. "What is all this?" "Everything I remember," Delia said. "Dates, conversations, incidents. Things Preston said when he thought I was too scared to use them. Things his father said at family dinners that he never bothered to guard because he didn't think I was worth guarding against." She turned the second pad toward him. "This is the structure of it. Who owes what to whom, where the money moved. I lived inside that family for 5 years. I paid attention because paying attention was the only control I had over anything." Rafe looked at the pad. The map she'd drawn was intricate in specific names and dates and dollar amounts, connections between them, rendered in blue ink, with the painstaking clarity of someone who had been assembling this picture in her head for years and was finally putting it on paper where someone else could see it. "This is for Cobb," he said. "It's for whoever can use it." Delia took the pad back. "Gerald Foss has the documentary evidence. I have the inside knowledge. Neither of us is enough alone." She looked at him steadily. "Together we're enough." "I believe that." "So do I." She held his gaze for a moment. "Then how's your hand?" He looked at his right hand. The knuckles were swollen and dark at the joints. He'd wrapped it himself in the cell with a strip torn from his shirt. "Functional," he said. "He provoked you deliberately." "He did." "Did it help at all?" Rafe thought about this honestly. "For about half a second," he said. "Then no." Delia looked at him with something that might, from someone who'd had more sleep, have been amusement. "For what it's worth," she said. "Cannon played me the recording this morning. What Preston said about your brother." Her voice quieted. "I'm sorry he said that. About Tommy." "Don't be sorry for what he said." Rafe looked at the table. "Be part of making sure he can't say things like that to anyone else." "That's what I'm doing." She gestured at the pads. "That's what all of this is." Cannon appeared in the doorway. "Foss is on the phone. He wants to talk to both of you." Rafe took the call on speaker at the table with Delia beside him, the legal pads spread between them like a map of territory they were preparing to enter together. Foss's voice was measured and unhurried, the voice of a man who had learned long ago that urgency and speed were entirely different things. "Agent Cobb received authorization at 9:47 this morning," he said. "Emergency federal investigation, civil rights, and criminal conspiracy. The scope includes Warren Vane, Preston Vane, and any county or municipal officials identified as participants in the underlying conduct." Delia closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "She's moving tonight," Foss continued. "Federal warrant for the vehicle examination, that's the photographs becoming a legal starting point as I described. Arrest warrants for Warren and Preston Vane are being prepared pending the vehicle examination results." "And Pruitt?" Rafe asked. "Pruitt is a separate matter." A pause. "I've made a suggestion to Agent Cobb. Whether she acts on it is her decision." "What suggestion?" "That a conversation with Sheriff Pruitt before the warrants are served might be productive." Foss was quiet for a moment. "There are men who do wrong because they are fundamentally wrong. And there are men who do wrong because they made one decision long ago that made the next decision easier, and then the next, until they find themselves somewhere they never intended to be and genuinely cannot see a way back." Another pause. "I've known Dale Pruitt for 15 years. He is the second kind. And men of that kind, when they see the door clearly enough and understand that it won't stay open, sometimes choose to walk through it." Rafe thought about Kendricks in the hospital lobby, the deputy who had found something in himself at the critical moment, the beginning of firmness in a man who had been soft in the wrong places for too long. "When does Cobb arrive?" he asked. "Tonight. She's requested that you keep Delia at the clubhouse and maintain your current security posture. No movement, no confrontations. She wants nothing to complicate the warrants." "Understood." Mr. Harlan. A pause. Warren Vane is going to know something is happening before Cobb gets there. Men like him have systems, informants, networks, people who call when things start to shift. He'll have some warning. What does he do with warning? He escalates, Foss said simply. He's done it before. When he senses a situation moving outside his control, he applies more force, more legal pressure, more official weight. A pause. Be ready for that tonight. The line went dead. Rafe looked at Delia. She was looking at the third legal pad, the list. He could see at the top of it 2 words she'd written encircled with careful deliberateness. Hope. Testimony. Tonight, she said. Tonight, he agreed. They didn't have to wait as long as Foss had predicted. At 7:40 in the evening, Sledge came into the main room from the front gate with the taut, controlled expression he wore when something was wrong, and he was managing his own response to it carefully. 6 vehicles, he said. County Sheriff's Department. Dale Pruitt himself. Rafe stood up from the table. He looked at Delia. Stay here, he said. Lock this room. Don't open it for anyone but me or Cannon. Rafe, I'll be right outside. You'll hear everything through the wall. He held her gaze for a moment. This is part of it. This is him escalating exactly like Foss said he would. Let me handle it. She nodded. Once firm, the nod of a woman who had decided to trust someone and intended to honor that decision completely. He went out. The night was full dark now, cold and clear, the tree line sharp against a sky that had more stars than clouds for the first time in several days. The clubhouse yard was lit by the overhead flood security lighting that turned everything harsh and flat and shadowless. At the front gate, 6 county vehicles were lined up along the road, their light bars cycling blue and red in the dark. Rafe counted deputies, 8 of them deployed at intervals along the fence. And at the front, standing beside his own vehicle with a megaphone hanging at his side, like he wasn't sure he wanted to use it, Sheriff Dale Pruitt. 14 iron wolves formed a line between the gate and the clubhouse door. Not armed, not moving, just present and certain. Rafe walked to the gate. Pruitt was in his late 50s, heavy-set in the way of a man who had once been physically capable and had let it go gradually without quite noticing the change. He had a lawman's face-set features, watchful eyes, the particular blankness of someone trained not to show what they were thinking. But tonight there was something else in it, something underneath the blankness that wasn't quite blankness, something that had weight. They looked at each other through the gate. Dale, Rafe said. Pruitt blinked at the use of his first name. Mr. Harlan, I have a court order. I know you do. Rafe kept his voice even conversational the way he'd kept it in the hospital lobby the day before. Warren Vane signed it, just like he signs everything. Just like he's been signing things in this county for 30 years, and you've been doing what those signatures told you to do for most of that time. Pruitt's jaw tightened. That's not... Your daughter's name is Melissa, Rafe said quietly. The megaphone dropped another inch. She was 24 when it happened, Rafe continued. Her husband at the time. The case that went nowhere, the report that got buried, the evidence log that came back incomplete. He watched Pruitt's face carefully. Gerald Foss has the documentation. All of it. Not to use against you, to use against the system that made it happen and the people who ran that system. He paused. You filed that report yourself, Dale. You filed it correctly the way you were trained to. And then someone above you made sure it disappeared. And you let them. Because by then you'd already let them do so many things that one more felt like the same weight as all the others. Pruitt didn't say anything, but his hands at his sides had changed, no longer the deliberate stillness of a man in command, but the stillness of someone who has gone very quiet inside, where the real accounting happens. I'm not your enemy, Rafe said. I never was. The people who put you here tonight made you drive out to this gate with those lights going. They're your enemy. Because when this falls apart, and it is falling apart tonight, They are going to need someone to blame who isn't them. And you've always been the most convenient option. He took one step closer to the gate. Melissa deserved better. You know she did. And the only way you can give her that now, the only way left, is to walk through the door that's standing open right now before it closes. The deputies behind Pruitt were watching, not moving, not reaching for anything, just watching their sheriff. Pruitt looked at the megaphone in his hand, looked at it for a long moment, like he'd forgotten what it was meant to accomplish. Then he looked at his deputies. "Stand down," he said. His voice came out rough at the edges, like something that had been stored too long in the wrong conditions. "Step back to the vehicles." One of the deputies started to say something. Pruitt looked at him with the full weight of 22 years behind a badge, and the deputy stopped. They stepped back. Pruitt looked at Rafe through the gate. He reached up and took off his hat, which was something Rafe hadn't expected, and turned it once in his hands looking at it. "I have files," Pruitt said. His voice was low enough that only Rafe could hear it clearly. "Everything they made me bury. Every case, every payment, everything." He exhaled slowly. "I kept copies. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I always knew it would come to this eventually." "There are federal agents en route right now," Rafe said quietly. "Tell me you're willing to hand everything over." "Yes?" The word came out like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time and was finally at cost released. "Yes, tell them I'm ready to talk." Rafe opened the gate. Pruitt walked through, hat still in his hands, and for a moment he just stood there in the floodlit yard, looking like what he was, a man who had traveled a long way in the wrong direction and had just turned around, not knowing yet what the road back looked like or how long it was. One of the deputies at the vehicles called his name, uncertain. Pruitt raised one hand without turning. "Go home," he said. "All of you. Go home." Cannon appeared at Rafe's shoulder. "Cobb," he said quietly. "Call her," Rafe said. "Tell her we have Pruitt. Tell her to come now." Agent Renee Cobb arrived at 11 minutes past midnight. 3 black SUVs, no light bars, moving fast and quiet down Route 14 and through the gate that Rafe had left open for them. She was out of the lead vehicle before it fully stopped, a woman in her mid-40s, compact and direct, with the kind of face that had spent years in rooms where people lied to her professionally and had long since stopped being surprised by any of it. She showed her credentials to Rafe with the brisk efficiency of someone who considered the formality necessary and the delay unfortunate. "Mr. Harlan," she shook his hand once. "I've been wanting to get into this county for 7 years. I'm glad someone finally gave me a reason that would hold." "Gerald Foss gave you the reason," Rafe said. "Foss gave me 30 years of documentation. You gave me a living victim in a current crime." She glanced toward the clubhouse. "Mrs. Wren, inside. I'd like to speak with her as soon as we've secured the immediate situation." She turned to where Pruitt was standing near the main building with Cannon. "Is that Pruitt?" "Yes, he's cooperating." Cobb looked at Pruitt for a moment with an expression that contained several things simultaneously. "Okay," she said. "Let me talk to him first." She crossed the yard with the purposeful stride of someone who had been waiting for this moment and wasn't going to waste it. Rafe watched her go and then looked up at the sky. The stars were still there, unchanged, indifferent to the specific weight of what was happening below them. He thought about how many nights like this there had been in this county, nights when the Vane family had reached their instruments and turned their dials and made the systems perform according to their specifications, and no one had looked up and understood, this is the night it stops. This was that night. He went inside to Delia. She was standing at the window of the back room when he came in, looking out at the yard through a gap in the curtains. She'd watched the whole thing, or most of it. She turned when he entered. "Pruitt walked through," she said. "Yes. I didn't think he would." Her voice was quiet, not celebratory, more like someone processing something unexpected. "I spent 5 years watching people in that county choose not to. Watching them weigh what they knew against what it would cost them and choose to not know it." She looked at the yard where Cobb was talking to Pruitt under the security floods, two agents taking careful notes. What was different about him? His daughter, Rafe said, and time. Carrying something that long changes the weight of it. Eventually, it becomes heavier than everything else. Delia turned fully to look at him. Like you and Tommy. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Is it going to be enough? What Pruitt has, what Foss has, what I have, is it going to be enough to hold them? Cobb thinks so, Rafe said. I think so. And Preston, Rafe looked at her steadily. There are federal agents at his residence right now, and at the airfield the family owns in case he's smarter than I think he is. Delia absorbed this. She turned back to the window. In the yard, Cobb had finished with Pruitt and was now talking to Cannon, who was pointing at something on his phone, the photographs being transferred to federal hands for the first time. I want to see Hope tomorrow, Delia said. Whatever happens, whatever needs to happen with Cobb and the testimony and all of it, I need to see my daughter tomorrow. You will, Rafe said. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. She looked at him over her shoulder. In the reflected light from the yard, her face was tired, uncertain in equal measure. Two things that didn't always coexist in a person, but had found a way to in this one. The arrest of Warren Vane happened at 2:17 in the morning. Rafe wasn't there for it. Cobb's team handled it, a coordinated operation, 3 locations simultaneously, the kind of precision that came from 7 years of preparation compressed into a single night by people who had been ready and waiting for the opportunity. Warren Vane was taken at his home, still in his robe. The accumulated authority of 30 years on the bench, reduced in the space of 1 minute to a man in handcuffs being read his rights in his own kitchen by people he had no power over. Preston was arrested at the family's private airfield. Foss called with the details at 3 in the morning, his voice carrying the quality of a man who has waited a very long time for something and is still in the process of believing it has actually arrived and is real. Preston had been at the airfield with luggage, 2 bags, a carry case, and a passport. He had underestimated the federal response time by approximately 4 hours. The agents had been waiting for 90 minutes before his car came through the gate. He cried, Foss said. There was no satisfaction in his voice, just the plain fact of it reported accurately. When they put the handcuffs on, he cried and he kept saying his father would fix it. His father's in the cell next to him, Rafe said. Yes, Foss said. He is. Rafe sat with that for a moment. Outside the window of the office where he'd taken the call, the first light of morning was beginning to separate the dark into its component parts. Sky from tree line, road from field. The familiar geography of a county he'd spent 20 years in, slowly becoming something he recognized differently than he had before. Foss, he said. Yes. Tommy, he kept his voice level. It took the effort it always took, even after 18 years of practice. Delray, the man, and Alderson Cobb will move on that now. It was part of her authorization, Foss said. She'll have agents at Alderson within 48 hours. Delray has been waiting for someone to ask the right questions for 3 years. A pause. It will take time, Rafe. Getting to the full truth of it, the formal legal acknowledgement that takes time. But yes, it's going to happen. Rafe said nothing for a moment. He was a good man, he said finally. Tommy, he was better than me, honestly. Kinder. He would have been a good father, a good husband. He had all of that in him and more. His voice was steady. He'd had 18 years to practice steadiness on this subject. He deserved somebody fighting for him when it mattered. I was 29 and I didn't know how. You know how now, Foss said quietly. Yes. Rafe looked at the brightening window. I know how now. He put the phone down and sat alone with that for a while. When he came out, Delia was in the main room with Cannon and Sledge and 3 other brothers, and she looked at his face when he entered and understood without asking that the news was real and not something he was still waiting to confirm. She crossed the room and stood in front of him and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she put her hand against his chest over his heart briefly, a gesture that was neither romantic nor clinical, something more fundamental than either. The gesture of one person acknowledging another's grief with the respect of someone who genuinely understood what it was to carry something for years without being able to set it down. "Tommy," she said quietly. "The process starts now," Rafe said. "It'll take time for the formal truth to come out, but it starts now." She nodded. "Good." Then after a moment, "Can we go see Hope?" 12 days after her birth, Hope Wren weighed 4 pounds and 8 ounces. The NICU nurses had been calling her a fighter since day 3, which in Rafe's observation was something they said about babies who gave them actual reasons to believe it, not something they said automatically to comfort families. Hope had given them reasons. She had graduated from full ventilation to assisted breathing to intervals of independent respiration with the incremental stubbornness of someone who had decided that obstacles were logistical problems to be solved rather than arguments to be accepted. The NICU was quiet at this hour. Soft lighting, the rhythmic sounds of monitoring equipment, the hushed atmosphere of a place where everything important was happening too slowly to see, but was happening nonetheless. Rafe stood outside the observation window. The federal marshal who had been stationed at the hospital since 2 nights ago was somewhere down the corridor, giving them the space the situation had stopped requiring. Inside, a nurse carried Hope to Delia. Rafe watched through the glass. He watched Delia's face when the nurse placed the baby in her arms, watched the moment of it, the way it moved through her, like something completing itself. She had been composed for days. She had been by any reasonable measure the most composed person in any room she'd entered since the night on Highway 9. Composed through the questioning, through the legal battles, through the confrontations and the reversals, and the long gray hours of waiting for things she couldn't control. She had carried all of it with the steadiness of someone who had decided that steadiness was the only gift she had left to give and intended to give it fully. She was not composed now. She bent her head over her daughter and her shoulders moved and she held Hope against her chest. Something open and waiting, finally closing into itself, complete in a way that had nothing to do with law or testimony or justice, and everything to do with the simple fact of 2 people finding each other after a night that had tried to make it impossible. He put his hand against the glass, just for a moment, then he let it fall. The trial of Preston Vane lasted 3 weeks. Delia testified for 2 days. She wore the same dark blue dress, both days a choice Rafe understood as deliberate continuity, consistency, the visual embodiment of a woman who was the same person yesterday and today and would be tomorrow regardless of what the defense attempted to make her into. The defense attempted considerable. They attacked her mental health history. They produced the documentation Preston had assembled over 5 years, the physician's assessments, the prescriptions, the clinical language of a record constructed to make a woman look fragile and unreliable. Delia's attorney, Constance Abernathy, assigned by the federal court, a woman known in the Richmond district for the quality of her preparation and the precision of her silences before she spoke, objected to each exhibit with the devastating accuracy of someone who had spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly this line of attack. They attacked her credibility on the basis of her relationship with the Iron Wolves. They implied with the careful indirection of lawyers who knew what they could and couldn't say directly that Rafe Harlan had reasons of his own for wanting the Vane family destroyed, and that Delia had been influenced, coached perhaps, in ways she didn't fully understand herself. Delia answered this directly in the flat, clear voice she'd used for 2 days. She said, "I crawled through broken glass with my daughter inside me because my husband drove me off a cliff. I reached toward the sound of motorcycle engines because they were the only sound I heard. Nobody told me what to think about that night. I was there." The jury convicted Preston on all counts in 4 hours and 11 minutes. Rafe was in the courthouse hallway when the verdict came through. He didn't go in for the reading, didn't feel it was his place. Cannon was there. Foss was there. Sarah Delwood, who had been replaced as lead counsel by Abernathy when the case went federal, but had refused to stop working it regardless, was there in the gallery with the expression of someone watching a long overdue debt finally being paid. When Delia came out of the courtroom, she found Rafe in the hallway, and they stood together for a moment without speaking. Around them, the courthouse was doing what courthouses did after verdicts, moving on, processing, reformatting itself for the next thing on the docket. The practiced indifference of institutions that had seen everything before and would see it all again. Warren Vane's trial starts in 6 weeks, she said. I know. I'll testify there too. I know. She looked at him. Are you going to keep saying that to everything I tell you? Probably, Rafe said. I usually know. This time she actually smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't have anything behind it except itself, no grief, no calculation, no performance. Just a woman who had survived something enormous, finding that her face still remembered how to do this. Warren Vane's trial was longer and harder, and in some ways stranger than his son's. The trials of powerful men who have spent decades being untouchable always were. His defense team was better and better resourced. The arguments were more sophisticated, and the proceedings had the quality of someone fighting not just for freedom, but for the preservation of an entire constructed identity that had taken 30 years to build. Pruitt's testimony took 2 days. He was methodical and specific and visibly diminished by what he was doing, not performing guilt, but genuinely carrying it, which was different in every way that mattered and considerably more persuasive to anyone watching carefully. He named names, dates, amounts. He described instructions received and actions taken and the long, incremental process by which a person who had considered himself a decent man had arrived somewhere that decency no longer accurately described. The jury convicted Warren Vane on 11 counts, including the conspiracy charge that connected him directly to the events of the night on Highway 9. Rafe watched the coverage on a television in the clubhouse. The broadcast cut between the courthouse exterior and archive footage of Warren Vane at various points in his career. Ribbon-cutting civic events, the performative visibility of a man who had understood for 30 years that appearances were a form of protection against scrutiny. He looked in all of it like exactly what he had wanted people to see. Rafe watched it for a while and then turned the television off. The letter arrived 6 weeks after Warren Vane's sentencing. It came to the clubhouse addressed to Delia in an envelope with a federal correctional facility return address. Rafe recognized the facility name, not Alderson, a different one in Pennsylvania. Preston's current location. She found it in the morning mail and read it at the table in the main room with Cannon and Sledge somewhere in the background and the ordinary sounds of the clubhouse around her. Rafe was working at the other end of the table, and he watched her read it once straight through without changing expression, without saying anything. When she finished, she set it flat on the table and sat with it for a moment. What does it say? He asked. That he was wrong. She looked at the letter without touching it. That he's glad I survived. That he hopes Hope grows up to be like me. She paused. That he's not asking for forgiveness. Is he telling the truth? Probably. She folded it along its original crease with deliberate care. People tell the truth when there's nothing left to gain from lying. He has nothing left. She stood. Come outside with me. They went to the yard. The season had turned fully by now. December, the trees bare the sky, the gray of a Virginia winter that had committed to itself. Delia went to the fire barrel that one of the brothers had set up near the fence line for cold evenings. She found matches on the shelf inside the main building without looking for them because she knew where things were now. She came back and put the letter in the barrel and lit it. It caught immediately. The envelope, the pages, all of it burning clean and fast, the way dry paper did when it had been waiting for this. She watched it until there was nothing left but ash. Anything, Rafe asked. Nothing, she said. And that's the best I've felt in years. They stood in the cold for a while after that without talking. The ash settled. A hawk moved across the gray sky above the tree line, unhurried. Somewhere inside, Sledge was arguing with someone about something that sounded like a delivery schedule, and Cannon's voice cut through the argument with the authority he reserved for things that were genuinely inefficient, and the ordinary sounds of the clubhouse went on being ordinary around them. 1 year later, the convoy assembled at 9 in the morning, 7 bikes and 2 vans. The vans carrying supplies and 3 of the brothers' families who had volunteered for transport duty without being asked. Rafe checked the route on his phone one last time. Westbrook to Cedar Falls through Millhaven, arriving at the new facility by early afternoon. 5 families, 12 children, 18 bags between them. The Margaret Wren Foundation. Delia had named it after her mother, a woman who had spent the last years of her life watching her daughter disappear into a marriage she couldn't stop, and who had died without seeing her get out. The name was an answer to that of a kind. The foundation had been operating for 8 months now. Tax-exempt status, a board of directors, 2 staff members, and a network of safe houses and transport routes that covered 4 counties and was adding a 5th. The Iron Wolves provided the transport, others provided the rest. The Westbrook shelter was a converted Victorian on a side street painted gray with no sign out front that said what it was. Rafe had been here 4 times now. He knew the director, a woman named Carla, who had done this work for 11 years and approached it with the practical compassion of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what people could survive and had never once stopped being impressed by it. Inside, 5 women were ready. Delia went in first. Rafe and the brothers waited outside, which was how she'd arranged it. Her work, her territory, her language for what happened in there. He waited in the cold and listened to the sounds of preparation from within the building. The low voices, the movement of people getting ready to leave one life for another. A woman came to the door after a few minutes holding a toddler against her hip. She looked at the bikes at the men standing beside them with the wary attention of someone recalibrating a threat assessment they'd spent years carefully developing. Then she looked at Rafe directly. "Are you the one they call Rafe?" she asked. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. At his cut, his age, the general accumulated fact of him. "Delia said to trust you," she said. "She said you were the one who stopped." "Stopped," Rafe said. "On the road. The night she said you could have driven past. Most people did." The woman shifted the toddler on her hip, a practiced adjustment. "She said you stopped." Rafe thought about fog and headlights and a white dress at the bottom of a dark ravine. About 20 engines going quiet all at once on a highway where no one else had stopped. "There were 20 of us," he said. "Any one of them would have done the same." The woman looked at him steadily for a moment. "But you went first," she said. "That's the part she told me. You went first." He didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure one was needed or that words were the right form for it anyway. Delia came out with the group a few minutes later, moving easily among the women, talking to this one, listening to that one, carrying one of the children on her hip with the practiced ease of a mother who had learned both how to hold on and when to let go. She caught Rafe's eye across the yard and nodded once. "Ready." They loaded the vans. The brothers helped with the bags without being asked, made conversation with the children, did the careful and gentle work of large and weathered men trying to make small, frightened people feel less afraid. Sledge let a 6-year-old sit on his motorcycle, which produced a sound that Rafe hadn't heard enough of lately and intended to hear more of. He filed it away for later. Hope was in the second van with Tess, one of the brothers' wives who had taken on the NICU shifts during the hardest weeks and never quite stepped back from the role of person who was simply present when presence was what was needed. Hope was 13 months old now and had opinions about everything within reach, which was most things, because she had learned to pull herself upright on any available surface and had recently begun to understand that surfaces could be moved between if you were determined enough about it. Delia climbed onto the back of Rafe's bike. She'd done it twice before. The first time with considerable caution and significant commentary about helmet specifications. The second time more easily, with fewer questions and more trust. This time, she settled in with the comfort of someone who had decided she trusted the machine and the man handling it, and she put her hands at his sides and said nothing at all. Rafe started the engine. The convoy moved out of the yard and onto the road. 7 bikes leading 2 vans behind, the sound of them filling the still December air, and then spreading out and becoming part of the landscape the way sound did in open country when there was nothing to stop it. The road through Westbrook was empty at this hour, the storefront shut or just opening the few people out, looking up at the passing sound, and then looking away with expressions that ranged from mild interest to mild disapproval. The usual range, he'd stopped noticing it years ago. Rafe rode and let his mind do what it did, at the right speed on the right road. Thoughts becoming less like arguments and more like weather moving through, rather than landing present without demanding anything. He thought about Tommy, who was going to get the truth told about him before another year was done. The Delray proceeding had moved slowly, and then all at once, as Foss had predicted such things did, and the formal findings were expected in spring. It wouldn't give Tommy his life back. It wouldn't give Rafe his brother, or the years, or the mornings he'd woken up and felt the absence like a room that should have had furniture in it. But it would give Tommy his name back, his record, the simple and irreducible dignity of the true version of what had happened, being the version that existed in the official world for anyone who looked. Rafe had decided that was something real. He was still deciding exactly how much, and he thought that was probably the right way to be about it, not settling the question, but staying with it honestly. He thought about Warren Vane, 71 years old and serving 22 years in a federal facility, and about Preston serving 34. He thought about Dale Pruitt, who had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, and was now at 58 doing something Rafe genuinely had not anticipated, working with a nonprofit in Richmond that provided legal aid to domestic violence survivors. Foss had mentioned it once without editorial comment. Rafe had filed it in the place he kept things that didn't fit neatly into the categories he'd built over the years in the section marked, "Turns out people are complicated," and that goes both directions. He thought about Delia behind him, her hands steady at his sides. He thought about what she'd built from what had happened to her. Not despite it exactly, but from it, the way someone who has lost everything learns to build differently. Not from a plan, but from what remains, and what those remaining things are actually capable of becoming. He thought about the legal pads she'd covered the morning after the worst night, assembling her testimony while he was in a cell, and she had no one to tell her she couldn't, because that was who she was underneath everything that had been placed on top of her. He thought about the woman at the shelter door who had said you went first, with the certainty of someone who understood that going first when going first cost something was the whole thing. He thought about 20 engines on a foggy road going quiet all at once, about the chance of it or the purpose of it. He still wasn't entirely sure which he believed, and he had made his peace with that uncertainty, had decided it was a question worth carrying, rather than one that needed answering the way certain things were best held, rather than resolved. They came out of Westbrook onto the open highway, and the road straightened ahead of them, and the country opened up on both sides, fields running out flat toward distant ridgelines under the gray winter sky. Rafe opened the throttle a little. Behind him, Delia's hands tightened briefly. Not in fear, he knew the difference now, and then eased as the speed settled into something constant and trustworthy. Somewhere in the van behind them, Hope was doing whatever Hope was doing. Probably pulling herself upright on something. Probably succeeding and then looking around for the next thing to try. The road stretched ahead, long and straight and open, belonging to whoever was willing to ride it and stay on it and keep going even when the fog came in and the visibility dropped, and the only thing you could do was trust the men riding with you and keep the light pointed forward. Rafe rode.